Hi, I'm Chris Redmond. I'm the CEO at Red Hot, and I'm the host of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. We've been doing this for the last few years, and over that period of time, I've been lucky enough to be introduced and interview and get to know the complexion of some amazing people's careers. Creative people, innovative people, business leaders, and thought leaders. I am super proud today to welcome Natasha Matos Hemmingway to Studio Red. Natasha is the Chief Commercial and Marketing Officer and has also got the small bolt on at NBC Shahid of being accountable for the product line as well. I'm looking forward today to speaking to Natasha mostly about the complexion of her career and how she has got to the level that she's at on the global stage at what is a superpower in the broadcasting industry, particularly in this region. Natasha, welcome to Studio Red.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good to be here.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to you today, Natasha, to appreciate what it's been like on the rise of your career through some really interesting organizations that everybody will know, but really cutting to the chase on what your drivers are. I know you're an extremely ambitious individual.
Can you tell?
I've worked for you as an external entity, and I know that you set the benchmark high, not only for the people around you, but actually for yourself significantly. So I want to get to what the DNA is of a career like yours for a lady like you, and then maybe talk a little bit about, you know, your ambitions going forwards as well. Let's start with that, Natasha. What is it that motivates somebody like you when you get out of bed in the morning? What drives you? What's the fuel in the tank?
Yeah, it's a really good question to kick it off. Honestly, I've got a simple answer to that. It's just the, wanting to be better every day. It sounds a bit cliche-ish, but I do kind of subscribe to the notion of, what you're trying to do is be better than the person that you were yesterday. And so I do, I have a bit of a ritual where at the end of the day, I kind of, think, okay, how did the day go? What did I do that was good? What did I do that could have potentially be better? Kind of record that and wake up the next morning really excited about there's a new day. There's more opportunities for me to go after, and how can I just continuously be better, be a better mother, a better wife, a better daughter, a better friend, better professional, better leader. How can I just keep on pushing myself to do what I need to do in a better way so that everyone around me gets the benefit of me at my peak, and everyone gets the benefit of just, being able to move together, forward.
Is it a head or a heart thing? Is that something you're conscious of, or is it intuitive?
I think for the longest time, it was kind of intuitive, and now that I've become aware of it, it's also a head thing. So I'm using both. Whereas before, it was very kind of natural. I don't know if I would say I'm a perfectionist, but I do strive to just continuously improve myself and improve everything that I do. And I think that's kind of by nature. I'm designed that way. And as I've gotten, older, more senior, etc., I've become aware of that and of my ability to do that quite easily, because it's not easy. I mean, to sit down and kind of reflect on, jeepers, I did this wrong or I did this great, and kind of process that. But I use that as a method to, continuously get better and deliver better results, both personally and professionally. So it has become a head thing, but it started as a heart thing.
You've been really successful at a number of organizations, big organizations, Microsoft, MultiChoice, and obviously NBC and Google. I mean, everybody knows Google, right?
Yeah.
When I take what you've just said about that benchmark that you set for yourself, the fact that exists within you at a head and heart level, how does that affect the way that you mobilize and motivate teams and the people around you as well?
That's a good question. I think that because I'm aware of it, and because you said it in the introduction, I kind of put that pressure on myself, right? So I am aware of it, and I think how it affects those around me is initially, I suppose, if people aren't used to me, they can probably go, oh my gosh, okay, this is a lot to deal with. But as I've gotten, more experience at leading teams and more in tune with how I lead teams, I think that what it does is it does create an environment where I do have a high standard, but I help people get to that high standard. But it also means that I'm very vulnerable with my team. So sometimes I set my ambitions too high, and I have to be big enough to go back to them and go, okay, maybe I was a bit too ambitious on that one. What's the learning that we need to take here? How do we circle back? So I think it works if there is a whole lot of vulnerability and humility that comes with that need for continuously improving. So balancing those two allows me, I think, to create an environment for my team where they themselves want to strive to be better because they can see the benchmark that I'm kind of setting for themselves and for me and for us as a team. But there's also that space for them to go, okay, this is not working. How do I regroup? Or, I'm going to try this and potentially fail, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the environment that I try and create for them and for myself so that we can have this kind of continuous learning experience together.
You're a mother as well.
I am.
And do you think you've got a maternal style towards leadership, or do you think the two kind of play into each other?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a weird one to think about because I think they could have like a bit of a negative connotation to it. But I do think I am quite maternal in my style in the sense that I care deeply about my team. I worked with a guy at Microsoft that used to make the joke that I have a face, and he used to call it, I don't even think I had kids back then, but he used to call it my mom face. Like they'd push me to a limit and then I'd pull a face and they'd all go, okay, no, we reached the limit, let's all just behave again. Exactly. So I do think that there's an element of me in my leadership style that is maternal because I do care a lot about what we do, and I care a lot about the humans in my team, not just the team as a collective and our business as a collective as well.
Yeah. You tend to be someone, Natasha, where when you post something on LinkedIn, it gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of people watching you, the kind of residual following from lots of big jobs you've had in your career. And you can tell from the way that people respond as well, a lot of the people who currently work within your team. Mm-hmm. And I think the stuff you post about is often about leadership, real values-driven stuff. And you can tell from the responses that you get that there's a lot of people there that kind of feel that maternal side of it, I think. What's your posture on, the kind of social media, from a leadership perspective? When you post that stuff and you see the responses, how much does that mean to you as a calibration?
I mean, I love the fact that people engage with what I'm saying and that my own team, it's not like external people are commenting only. I've got my own internal team commenting as well. And that means a lot to me because it means that it's resonating and that they feel it. And that's ultimately why I do what I do, because I need them to feel, the empathy that I bring to the role. Maternal is one word, I suppose. The more corporate accepted word is empathy. I'm very empathetic in my leadership style. And I tend to be quite tough but fair. And I think the team feels that. And so the fact that they respond to me not only in the company but also externally through commenting on posts like LinkedIn, I think is validation for the fact that they appreciate it, or at least I interpret it that way.
Are you conscious when you do that stuff online of it being, in a way, a signature of a more modern leadership style? Like you said, vulnerable earlier.
Yeah.
You do make yourself vulnerable. And I think that nowadays what that suggests to people is that that's a leader that's got a degree of confidence about being normal in the public domain.
Yeah, being human.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be a top exec and be human at the same time. And that is something that I subscribe to. I've always believed in that. And I think particularly when I got to kind of middle management, it wasn't always easy because, and I remember when I started the one gig at the one company, I had an executive coach working with me at the time, and she said, you're going to have a real hard time here because they've never seen anything like you. They need you because they need the style of leadership that you bring, but you're going to struggle because they don't know how to deal with it, You come in and you're vulnerable and you're authentic and you're empathetic and you're really pushy at the same time. You want to achieve big things, you've got big ambition, and that's a whole lot for, compared to the traditional style of leadership, which is very I'm going to generalize, but, hierarchical, et cetera, et cetera. So it hasn't always been easy, but I think the proof of success for me is the fact that I have been able to deliver really great results in pretty much every role that I've taken. But more importantly for me, I've been able to help people kind of grow into their roles and also prepare them for leadership, etc. That's why I do what I do. And I really hope a lot of the effort that I put into my leadership style, I do it because I hope that it kind of gets paid forward And then I'm showing those around me that there is a different way to be a really effective leader without having to subscribe to the kind of old school traditional way of leading.
I definitely feel as though you can see the equity associated to your brand from the nature of how people interact with you in the public domain. The warmth of their comments, I think is something that I always notice in the multiple responses you get. Your style and the advice that coach gave you, do you actually think that served you well in the tech sector? Because moving fast, being decisive, listening to your head and heart simultaneously, you know, you've achieved a lot, and you know, some could say you're probably at a midpoint of your career if we were to look at it from an age perspective. Yeah. You've already come miles. Do you think that's one of the reasons why? Because you naturally operate like that?
I think so. I naturally operate like that, but also I think I've got a really high pace. And even, you know, I was in the tech sector, and tech is known for being quite fast-paced. And even for the tech sector, I was fast. And then I came into media, and you know, and so I think it's a combination of both. I've got this, you know, I have this ability to really know my business and know what needs to get done. And then the empathetic parts, you know, and the kind of leadership style allows me to build high-performing teams. I combine those two to drive results, and I generally do that at quite a fast pace, which is why I've been able to progress so quickly in my career. Now, obviously, there's a learning in that as well, because you can't sustain, you know, I remember when I was younger, I used to be told, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint, Natasha, and I always used to roll my eyes at that. But it is true, and I'm starting to realize that, you know, I've had to, as I've taken on bigger roles, as I've worked in, you know, working in mature markets versus emerging markets is very different. And so, you know, having an appreciation for how to pace myself, what impact that has on my team. And also there's a huge component around being able to achieve results and timing, right? I always tell my team, you know, strategy and timing, it's really important to get that aligned. And so I've had to teach myself to also just, you know, use pace in a better way. But certainly in the beginning of my career, you know, my pace was really quite fast. Yeah. And so I think the two together allowed me to get far quite quickly.
What would be two highlights so far
in my career? The recent one, what we've been able to achieve with NBC has been incredible. So a bit of backstory there. So I was headhunted 2.5 years ago to join NBC and to join the Shahid team in particular. And this is off the back some of the work that I had done in Sub-Saharan Africa with another streamer. And when I was having the interviews or the conversations, one of the things was, you know, we have this ambition to go public, and obviously Shahid is an integral part of that story because you know, it's the streamer of the group. That's where a lot of the growth is coming from. It's somewhat future-proofing the group, and so it's important that we deliver success there. And I, you know, at the time that I joined, Shahid was already a well-established platform. I'm not going to take credit for creating it because I didn't. It was it had already gone through like a bubble of growth. But it was at a point where it was kind of stagnating, going backwards slightly, and it needed kind of fresh pair of eyes, which is why I was brought in. And we really started from the ground up, you know, looking at our marketing, our whole go-to-market elements around how well do we know our audience, how's the content performing, bringing that into conversations around, you know, are we making the right investments, how is our user experience? So we really worked on everything across the board. And a huge result of that is we've been able to, you know, drive significant growth in the market. I like to say, you know, we're the number one streamer in the region, which I'm quite proud of. We're now the number one, not only the number one streamer, but we're a true hybrid streamer and growing really well on both AVOD and SVOD, which I don't think a lot of players can claim. And obviously the combination of all of that is in the beginning of this year, the company announced that we were going to go public. And, you know, so if I reflect back, it's like I was kind of hired to participate in that journey, and now we've actually been able to achieve it. So it's incredibly proud moment for me and for my team.
How did it feel when that was done? I mean, that must have, I've seen those things before. It's an intense exercise.
It's like a sigh of relief, incredible amount of pride and just joy for the fact that we were able to achieve a milestone together, and such a significant milestone. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. Last year was like a bit of a blur, and and talk about pace. I mean, it was intense. But yeah, incredibly exciting and amazing. So that's definitely one. The second one, I would say, probably, so early on in my career at Google, I was recruited. I think I was like the new country manager when he had arrived. I was employee number 3. And I was recruited in the South African office and did about 2 years or so there. And then I was asked to go to Dublin to join the EMEA Emerging Markets Leadership Team. And at the time, again, I didn't come up with the idea, but I'm really good at picking up and delivering. And so when I joined the team, I was actually going to have a different set of kind of markets. I was trying to diversify out of Africa. I was going to have some emerging markets in Europe. But they had just approved to run a brand new pilot, and South Africa was one of the markets. And of course, I knew the market like the back of my hand. So I was asked, okay, so do these other countries and South Africa. So I had the most random combination of countries that I was managing. And the pilot, just without getting too technical, what it entailed is when Google does, or at least back in the day when they did sales at scale, it was governed by programs, obviously to have some kind of structure, etc. But what that meant is that they were leaving money on the table because there was a lot of markets that you needed to have a certain size to launch a program. And so there were markets that had a certain size collectively that was decent, but they didn't have enough to launch the different programs. Yeah. And so they decided, okay, let's allow 2 countries to go and just structure themselves. I mean, which at the time, for a structured company, it was like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. Yeah. But literally, there was another country in South Africa, and we were told, okay, you go and figure out how you want to tackle the market. And I had a great team. We were small but mighty. There's about 4 of us at the start. And we structured ourselves. We figured out, like, what is our go-to-market, how we built sales pitches, etc. Anyway, long story short, after 1 quarter, the one market continued to operate as they normally did. We completely changed how we operated, and so we managed to convince the VP to allow us to go for a 2nd quarter. Yeah. And we kept on going, and eventually we were able to almost double the size of that market. And by the time I left Google, this is the thing that I'm proud of, it actually became a fully fledged program that I think they still use it to go and launch new markets, or certainly that's how they started looking at launching emerging markets. So we created a whole pilot, basically, that then became a program, which I was particularly proud of.
There can't be many people in Google as it is now that can say something like, I mean, you were effectively a startup in Google, focusing.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I mean, we still had, all the other stuff, but we were allowed a bit of space to be creative with this. And it was governed, and we had to... From a development perspective, it was amazing because we had to report, to the senior leadership every week. We had to send our notes. We got to present. And so it was an amazing learning experience. But yeah, the fact that we can, like, all of us can look back and go, we contributed to that program kind of, maybe it's changed now, but at the time it was like that program exists because of the work we did. So that was pretty cool.
Are the people that did that with you still there, or have they moved on to other things?
Some have moved on.
Right.
Yeah.
Question for you, Natasha. You talk about tech and media. You said it earlier. You could say that Shahid is a convergence between those 2 things as an OTT platform.
Yeah.
What would be your take on that? Is that where the combination of your experience from the tech side comes into what you did at MultiChoice, and obviously NBC being what NBC is? I'm really interested in whether or not you feel that, from a tech perspective, because I see OTT as tech.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And to be honest, that's how I got convinced to come into the industry, because I was, I spent almost 5 years at Google and then almost 5 years at Microsoft. And I was a tech person. I'm not a techie, and that's a private joke in my household, because I actually did study computer science for a year at university, hated it. Somehow, I still remember that I was able to code in Java at some point. Right. Absolutely hated it, changed my degree. And then my husband tells the story to everyone. And then somehow I ended up working for 2 of the best tech companies in the world. So I have a deep, deep love and appreciation for what technology enables. I wish I was a techie. I'm not. I've always done commercial roles. And I was really happy in that space because I love the innovation and just the opportunity to drive better efficiency and change people's lives. I love what technology enables. So I was quite happy to stay in that space. And then MultiChoice, the CEO at the time at Showmax, he kind of had a conversation with me and convinced me, this is digital, it's not media, because I was like, I'm not a media person. I don't get broadcast. I'm not necessarily interested in it. And he was like, no, but this is the space you need to be. You need to come with that kind of commercial knowledge, that love for technology, that understanding of digital, because I am a digital native. And you need to bring that, because that is what streaming is. It's the best of media in the sense of the content, etc. And then there's the platform, there's a digital component, there's a technology. And so I got convinced to join, and now I've been in the industry for about 5 years. And I love it because of that, because there is that huge tech component to it. We're a digital product, so that is completely different to running a traditional broadcast environment, I believe. And so I really love that, and I think it talks really well to my skills and my experience, and again, still being able to come into the industry with a slightly different take, because I haven't come up the ranks in a traditional kind of media sense.
Yeah, in that way and that vein, the horizon of your perspective, like you'd said, is wide from a geographic perspective, not just a sector perspective. OTT is pretty well established now. COVID springboarded everybody into OTT. It's no longer a kind of digital frontier. It's a digital reality in most households. Yeah. How important is innovation to the OTT sector world? Is it still moving forward at the pace that it was, in your opinion?
It's an interesting question. I think innovation in general outside of OTT is moving at an interesting pace now, with all the noise that is happening around AI and Gen AI, etc. So I think that's an interesting one to observe and to learn. And I think if we don't, we're going to be left behind. So that's one statement. Within OTT itself, it's quite interesting, because there's so much noise around the business models and what works and what doesn't work. So I think whether we like it or not, we're being forced to innovate. And at Shahed, I think one of the things that I'm proud of is that we are trying to innovate as much as we can, and we do have the benefit of being a regional player, not a global multinational. So we have a bit more agility to our environment. So we use that to our advantage. But I think it's interesting, because we also need to be mindful of where consumers are, because consumers, they don't care about all the noise of our industry and our issues. They just want to have a great experience, find the content that they want and watch it. And they also have a certain expectation of experience. So I think it's interesting, because it's we're all kind of wanting to innovate, but we need to bring the users along with us, because the users are kind of going, we are used to a certain thing. So if you're going to change that, you have to be mindful of that. So I think there's different pockets of innovation that we need to continuously look at in OTT. There's the go-to-market and the business model. There's the experience, and then there's just the platform, the efficiencies. How do you leverage things like AI? So there's 3 pockets of innovation that I think any leader in OTT needs to be very active in. And some I think you're going to be able to move faster. Some that are, for example, when it comes to user experience, you're probably going to have to be a bit more measured and just make sure that you're really thinking through things before innovating too far ahead of what users might accept.
How intimate would you say you are? I guess you have to be when it comes to those kind of things and others on the competitive horizon. I mean, this region particularly is one that's got hotter and hotter over the last few months with the presence and gravity around the providers. Is that something that keeps you awake at night? Are you constantly aware of it?
Yeah, I am aware of it. Does it keep me up at night? I think there's other things that probably keep me up at night. I have a split view when it comes to competition, and I always tell this to my team. I think that we need to be mindful of the trends. We need to be mindful of what players are doing in general, and certainly what they're doing in our markets. But I don't want that to be our sole focus, because I am very much a believer of focus on your own game. And so we constantly try and kind of balance the two. So we're aware, we kind of instinctively know, because we know our market really well, and that's the benefit of being the local player. So we kind of can tell, okay, that's probably going to work, that's probably not going to work, but be mindful of it. There's certain things that we choose strategically. My leadership team, we sit and we discuss the business a lot every Thursday. I lock them in a room for a few hours and we brainstorm, what is happening, what are we seeing internally, or is there anything externally, and we debate it a lot. And then we decide, okay, what's going to serve us, and we incorporate that into our thinking. And what doesn't, it's noise. Focus on your own game. Make sure that you are, driving and hitting your objectives.
What inspires you, Natasha?
What inspires me? You know what? I'm quite competitive, so I love winning. And winning for me means, having an awesome team where we can have fun, where we can share our ideas, where we can, really challenge each other and ultimately be able to drive results together. That inspires me.
You're from Johannesburg. Mm-hmm. You lived in Dublin.
I did, 2 years.
Now you're in Dubai.
Yeah. And I grew up in Lisbon.
And Lisbon, yeah. I'd imagine you class yourself as a global citizen.
I do.
What is it about being in this region that keeps you in this region? Do you still love it? Does it still excite you on a daily basis?
I do. You know what? I love emerging markets. I just love there's like this odd combination of ambition and boldness and humility and just like a vibe that I really love. Not to say that you don't get that in mature markets. I think you get a different flavor of it. But I just love, particularly if I think about like my time at Sub-Saharan Africa, and I now often say this, I've worked in different markets, but my heart is in Africa. I love Africa. I love the hustle and bustle of Africa. I love the kind of bold humility that exists in the market. So I really love that. And in the Middle East in particular, I love the ambition and the boldness, and just also that kind of, it's less scrappy than in Africa, but there's also that kind of, there's still a bit of that hustle. Yeah. And so I love that about emerging markets. And, if I think, going forward, I'd love to be able to do more diversity of markets, and because I like to challenge myself and I like to keep on learning. But I don't think I'll ever stop working in emerging markets because I just love the kind of vibe that comes with the struggle. I often say that actually, like people will kind of, look at your CV and say, oh, they've only worked in Africa and like or in the Middle East and Africa, and you severely underestimate what it takes to do business in emerging markets, like the sheer stamina that you need to have to be able to drive results in markets that are not as efficient, maybe not as structured. It takes a lot to be able to drive results in emerging markets, and I love that about the environment.
I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I know that you're from a very entrepreneurial family. Do you think that, but you're very corporate, you've had some big corporate jobs for massive logos. Yep. But it's interesting hearing you describe what you've just described, because maybe that's where your edginess comes out in terms of that entrepreneurial spirit, that kind of being a bit streetwise to get stuff done in a corporate environment, but where you need to cut to the chase. Yeah,
and I think that you're right. I think that there's a big component of me being kind of a real person. I think that is very much influenced by my family. I do come from a family of entrepreneurs, a lot of failed entrepreneurship projects, and some that did okay. But there's that, there's that drive of let's try, let's make it happen. And so I am a corporate person. I've only been working in corporate, but I think I bring that element to it. It's just like, I call a spade a spade. Not a lot of people like that, but I do. Yeah. I'm very real about it. And I think my teams, the energy that they probably feel from me is that kind of bit of hustle. Like, let's be positive. We can do this. There must be a way. And I think, if I reflect back on, even in big structured companies like Microsoft, I think that I've always been able to deliver success because within the structure, I find a bit of wiggle room to just be a bit scrappy and try things and, just hustle a bit. Yeah. And I don't think I'll ever lose that because that's just, by design, how I am.
Do you tend to find that you gravitate towards a certain type of analogy quite a lot, like when you're leading your team or talking to your team? I find within my business at Red Holt that I use automotive analogies a lot. I'll talk about car stuff quite a lot. Yeah. Let's warm up the tires, let's make great lap times, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And I use kitchen analogies a lot because I always talk about my business being a kitchen and the dishes that we serve, even though we're in recruitment. Yeah. Have you got something like that is kind of reflective of the nucleus of the way that you see your teams?
I don't know if I use it a lot, but I suppose sports, because I do love sports, and it's genuinely something that most people can kind of connect to. So if anything, maybe I'll use sports. Yeah, I'd probably say
Any
that.
particular sport?
Well, football, obviously. Being Portuguese.
Yeah.
So we, as Shahed, we have the benefit and the pleasure and the honor of having the RSL on our platform, and so football is very much, ingrained in our day to day these days. So I think I tend to use football quite a bit if I do have to use analogies. Yeah.
So we're in January 2024 now. Last year was an interesting year. You had some real highlights. Obviously at NBC, you've mentioned one of them as your overall career highlight.
Yeah.
But I think most of the market, it would be fair to say, conducted themselves in a fairly cautious way because of macroeconomic circumstances to a large extent that were way beyond the control of the sector. What's your feeling about 2024 and the period that we're going into? Are you more excited about what 2024 might reveal? How are you feeling as a leader in that space?
Excited, but nervous excited, in the sense that, like we said earlier, there is a whole lot happening in the industry, and I think it would be really irresponsible not to acknowledge that. So I think, between layoffs at big companies, profitability conversations, and then there's the whole AI thing coming into play. So I think that there's a lot of things that could disturb the industry, and that's something that I'm obviously well aware of. So that is one of the components that I think we need to continuously navigate, and also in the sense that we need to make sure that we are learning, that we are continuously learning, figuring out how are we going to how does this affect us, how doesn't it, how do we absorb some of it, what makes sense, etc. So there's a lot of that kind of thinking, which I think will be there for the year. And there's a lot of noise in the industry, which we'll need to just continuously observe. I think as a business, Shahed, I'm quite excited this year, in the sense that, it's a big year for us. It's our first year as a publicly listed company. And so we need to be mindful of that in how we continue with our operations. But I think also really excited. We've got a really great content lineup coming up. I've got a great team in place. They give me so much joy. I love going to work every day. So I think it's going to be a good year. But I think as an industry as a whole, I think it could be. There's some challenges that we'll all have to kind of navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned AI a couple of times. Do you use it yourself?
I do, on a personal level. I've used it a few times. I'm trying to learn about it. I think as a leader in this time, I think it's really critical to stay on top of the trends, and this is a massive trend. And I think, again, talking about leadership styles, I think leaders that will do well are the learner leaders who are continuously pushing themselves to understand what's happening in their environment. So I'm forcing myself to learn about it as much as I can. And as a business, AI as a concept has been around for quite a while, and we've been using it to a certain degree. Anything to do with personalization, etc., will have to use a degree of AI. I think Gen AI is the one that's like really exploding, and that could really have a significant impact. I think in the industry, it will be interesting to see how regulation plays out around all of this. So that's, I think, a trend that's going to be quite interesting this year. And as a leader, I'm trying to learn about it, stay on top of it, and make sure that we are kind of incorporating that into our thinking. And just as a person, to stay relevant to the times, I'm trying to keep up with it as much as I can.
Yeah. Natasha, I remember when our paths first crossed, in a positive sense. Sounds a bit like negative connotation, as it wasn't. I think you were dashing off to Saudi to speak at a Forbes event.
Yeah. And
I've seen from what I can get about you in the public domain, you've done a lot of that kind of stuff. You must get invited a lot to do panel stuff and maybe even stuff like this. How does Natasha the person feel about that? Because anyone with your job title is going to get that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But how does it make you feel? Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I don't do as much of it because I enjoy it, but it is. I mean, it's not the most. this kind of thing is not the most comfortable for me. I mean, it's, exposing what I'm thinking and, thoughts about my career. I can't say that it's the most comfortable thing because I am quite humble at heart. I don't, while I can easily reflect back on my career and go, jeepers, I've done some amazing stuff. At the same time, I'm also like, yeah, it's been interesting, but what's next? I mean, it's not that impressive. So I do enjoy doing them because I love public speaking. I love connecting with different people. I love connecting with an audience. I love telling the Shahid story right now. I love it. So I do some of it, and where it makes sense, I'll participate. But I don't do like everything that I get requested because I think it would be overkill and I wouldn't necessarily enjoy it if I had to do it all the time.
You'd be constantly on a plane. Final question, Natasha. If you could offer the younger you one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's an interesting one. I've actually got I've got 3 pieces of advice that I generally give to the younger team members around me. Because I've gotten this question a lot, particularly from the ladies generally in my team. And so I generally say, number 1 is, take your career seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. I learned that a bit too late. I was like, am I corporate enough? Am I serious enough? And I think that, I got to a point where it's like, you're taking yourself way too seriously. Just relax a bit and enjoy the ride. So I think that's one advice that I always give. The other one is building time for recovery. We spoke about pace. I've always operated at a very high pace. And that comes at a cost, right? It's difficult to sustain a really high level of leadership and of results over a long period of time. We've got recent results. Klopp just announced his resignation from Liverpool, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, also the same. I mean, she was, and he is at the top of the game, and they decided to take a break. And I think that's an important acknowledgement. It is awesome to operate at a high level, but you do need to build in recovery time. I haven't always done that because I love working at a high pace and I'm super ambitious. But as I've gotten more senior and older, I've realized that it's not only a disservice to myself, but it's also a disservice to my team. So I have to, in that learning around, managing strategy with timing also comes a whole element of just creating buffer time to kind of take a breather, reassess, recover a bit, and then continue. So that's a piece of advice that I always give, the traditional, it's a marathon, not a sprint, because I've had to learn it the hard way. And then the third one, which is a really important one, which I wish I had given myself, is, it's really important, particularly in the beginning of your career, you're kind of chasing, a bigger scope, a bigger title, a bigger salary, and all of those are important. But often people don't think about, because maybe they don't have the luxury, but am I choosing the next manager that will serve me? I think that's an incredibly important relationship. And one of the things that probably young people kind of don't really look into. And I learned that the hard way. I took roles where, I wanted the role, the scope, the salary, and the title, but the manager wasn't necessarily the right manager for me. And so I got there in the end, but I really had to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there. Really whereas I've had managers that really bought into me, wanted to teach me, wanted to bring me along into the journey, and kind of, and so that's my way of paying it forward because it has been done to me. And I know what it means to have a manager that will really support you and go forward. And so that's the advice that I always give, particularly to the younger team members in my team, and also to the ladies, is make sure you're choosing a manager that will buy into you and help you grow, that doesn't just want, the pound of flesh to come in and deliver what they need to be delivered. They need to want to grow you, because that will take your career faster, further, than if you're just focusing on the kind of more materialistic elements and not really focusing on your own personal development, which you should be getting from a role as well.
It makes so much sense. And actually, I've never heard anybody say that. In 2 or 3 years while I've been doing this, you hear some similar type of what advice would you give to the younger you? It's the first time anybody's ever said that one. And it's kind of obvious, but it's one of those things that people might not think.
You kind of have to call it out. Yeah, people don't think about it. And again, that's important for me because, like I said, I've experienced it. And it's also an incredibly important point around leadership, right? So a leader's main job is not only to deliver success, it's to deliver success through its people and be a good people leader. And so the whole, cultivating really good managers and what it means to be a good manager and what it means to empower and develop people is an incredibly important topic for me. And so I always make that connection, because whether people are staying in my organization or even not, I always give them that advice, like, are you going somewhere where you're going to learn, not just earn?
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important, because, the culture that you have around you is what you experience every day. So if you don't have a manager that's creating a great environment for you to work in and that is supporting you, your whole attitude towards work is going to be impacted. And so it's an incredibly important component that I think is worthwhile calling out.
Yeah. Natasha, thank you for being a guest on the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. I feel like I've learned a lot about you in this conversation. We spoke to each other quite a lot because we've worked with each other on some of your critical hires. I now understand why you're so driven, the sporting mentality that you've got around setting the benchmark and the way you set that for yourself, and then the cascade of how your conduct affects the people around you. But what I've really taken from this, Natasha, is about how constantly ambitious you are. You kind of underplay what you've achieved already with a view towards how much more you can achieve. I suspect that'll be something that will be inherent throughout your whole career going forwards.
Probably.
Maybe one day we'll get the chance to do it again. We can check in and see how it's going. But Natasha, Matos, Hemmingway, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. It was a lovely conversation.
Thanks.